and a pleasure to be back among what I find is my kind of home community, if you will. I've worked for about 25 years now. About 15 of those have been in communications, and as a result of multiple ebbs and flows in life, I've done about 10 years of other things. But the adjacencies to communications are very clear and obvious. So I speak not from the distance that a lot of the other speakers have come to us from, but from a very close proximity. And I'll try and kind of do two things during this session. One is to talk about why risk has a place at the table. It does. And how, as communicators, we can start leveraging risks to become more compelling voices in the boardroom. Okay. And the second is about understanding how we can structure a way of thinking, a way of thinking in order to leverage some of the tools that risk people use to get better at planning our own communications as well. Okay. So there is a workshop element to this. We can get to it if time permits, but I'll certainly leave it with you. And there is a specific exercise that I'd like, in case you're interested, for you all to take on, and then we can either we can do a 1-hour session in a month's time or whatever else. Everybody gets back together and speaks, or we can do one-to-one sessions as well, depending on what works. Okay. Right. A quick introduction on control risks. It's a global firm, so it was set up about 50 years ago in the United Kingdom. Its claim to fame was as a kidnap and ransom negotiations consulting firm. It was set up by Hogg Robinson Group, which is a travel advisory, and it was set up essentially because British and European businessmen used to, take the wrong turn in the jungle and get lost and, or got kidnapped and so on and so forth. And the travel agency needed people who could go and rescue these guys back. And so a bunch of MI6 executives in 1972 got together, came into this company and set up the control risk department in HRG. In 1975, they decided it was growing in value, it was growing in prominence. There was a very significant insurance element to it. HRG itself was set up by Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London decided that there was a value creation opportunity. They asked the founders of the organization to spin off and become a company. 75, it was set up. And in 76, two of the senior executives, one of who's still in the company, went to Colombia to negotiate the release of a politician's daughter in Medellin, and ended up getting her out. Did not liaise with the president and his guards to ensure that the media, interestingly, was there to make sure that they were there, photographs were taken when she was handed back. And as a result of that faux pas, they felt like it was too much of a risk to have the media there. So they took their own counsel, and they decided not to call and tell the president that this was going down at 7 a.m. in the morning or something like that on a particular day. They got the girl out. She was back home safe to her father. And the father then asked these two guys to be arrested, and they spent the next 6 months in the Modelo jail in Bogota because they were, as egoistic as to have kind of made their own decision about the president's daughter, which led to the guys saying, look, we can't just do this as a K&R consulting firm. We need to have other elements of risk to understand what drives security incidents. And so they set up a political risk consulting offering around it as a wrap, around which came a whole bunch of other operational risk elements, integrity risks, and so on and so forth, and led to the creation of the organization. This doesn't move. led to the organization as it exists today, about 40 offices around the world. Effectively, we are an operational risk consulting company. We are a feet in the street consultant. We've got people who actually get stuff done. We're not, we don't build pyramids, we don't do models, business, etc. It's essentially a glass half empty company. And all of what I kind of will speak about to you is about an organization that looks at the whole world through what could go wrong, and the business model that the company has is really around how we help organizations kind of make sense of that. Okay, what we do, as many other firms do have, is something called a risk map for about. Chal gaya. Yep. What we have, as many other firms do, is an annual IP called the risk map. It's been produced since 1999, so this is the 25th year. And effectively, every single year we produce three things. We produce a map of the world as it exists. It's on the website. It's downloadable. It's free for consumption. There's a whole bunch of videos and so on and so forth around it. And effectively, it gives a picture of the world on the basis of three parameters: security risks, political risks, and cyber risks. Okay, there is three other forms of risks which we do deal with, which we dare not do a rating on, because I would not want to be at the other end of a MHA phone call if I rate India at 110 on integrity risks, as you can imagine. But integrity risks, corruption, graft, etc. So effectively, we've kind of drawn a consensus to say physical security risk, political risk, and cyber risks, and we create this map. It's not a country-specific map, it's region-specific. So India, obviously, you can see, has multiple colors. We're very conscious and careful about drawing political boundaries, because it's not just in India that are sensitive areas, but we're helped by the fact that not all parts of any one country is the same as well. The third thing that we do as a part of the risk map is to list out key risks. What are the 5 risks we forecast? What are the 5 top risks that are likely to impact business decision making in the next year? This is the 24 list. Okay, this was set up, it was put down in December of 2023, and we try and kind of have conversations around it, and through the year we try and kind of keep it bright and fresh. This is part 1 of the presentation, and I would like to kind of run through this because effectively most of it, and I'll just put some context around it, most of it is well understood. The only context I want to put is to go back and remind each of us about things that we've heard in this room yesterday. And I was quite amazed, and I've got a slide which I tried to make after 4 gins last night, which actually captures some of the comments that came out from yesterday. But I was interested enough to kind of at least draw the linkages back and forth. So these are the 5. What do they mean? Very quickly, the Great Realignment is about 2 things. It is about organizations having to become more local to be global. Globalization as we knew it for the last 30 years is dead. We all know that. The pandemic was a death blow, or the final nail in the coffin, if you will, for that model of business. But it also means that there are new ways of doing business that are available. And companies need to kind of understand that in a protectionism-driven world, they will have to be more local. And I think all of especially our MNC, all of you who work in MNC organizations understand the implications of why local is so important in the scheme of things. But what's also happening is that for the first time, there is a geopolitical kind of cleave again in 30 years. So since the fall of the Berlin Wall, there wasn't really us and them, and the third world anymore. But now that the world is reorganizing, it's not reorganizing very cleanly. Okay, and it's not reorganizing very cleanly, because of globalization. China still is very, very relevant. It's still the factory floor of the world, but also because the way that Russia will behave, or the way that Iran might behave, is not universally seen as black or white. So the cleave is not very clean. Okay, so it won't be the Red Bloc or the Warsaw Pact bloc and the NATO bloc anymore. It'll be like that. So there are implications around supply chain and so on and so forth for all of us. The other is the emergence of middle powers. It's a very interesting kind of development of the last 5 or 10 years. My favorite example, I mean, obviously I would say India, but my favorite example is Qatar. Qatar is, politically you might say insignificant, but obviously has the largest natural gas resource in the world. But they're also very, very relevant in not just the sub-regional geopolitics. They were able to keep India out of the Afghanistan negotiations at the behest of China. So you can imagine what kind of impact middle powers are having. Mexico as a middle power, be aligned with the United States as they are, but when NAFTA broke down, they were very quick to make friends with China. And China's got significant investments into Mexico. If you look at the way Brazil is playing its cards, if you look at the way Vietnam plays its cards, it's become the default China +1. Middle powers, therefore, are exercising a force or a power that is much more compelling now than has been the case in the past. And that has implications for businesses in India as we try and kind of make up become the China +1 by default, such. The implications for India, I think, are kind of fairly obvious. I've spoken about it. 3 points, if you will. One is about kind of the implications of India v. China. What India did in 2020 was seen as path-breaking. Continues to be something that is fairly novel. America is trying to do it. The banning of the Chinese apps, about 200 of them, and as an overt form of protest against what China intends or kind of does with the data that it takes away from the rest of the emerging or the Western world. But when we make overtures, the Chinese government kind of sent through congratulations to Mr. Modi when he won the 3rd term, or when he came back as Prime Minister. Sorry, didn't win the 3rd term. He came back as Prime Minister for the 3rd time. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs reminded them of the 3 mutuals. Mutual respect, mutual interests, and mutual sincerity, and sensitivity to each other's interests. So India is not leaving a lot of room on the table, just as China doesn't seem to want to kind of negotiate as well. At the same time, India and China have a $125 billion trade relationship, which is quite significant. And I think all of us as businesses kind of understand how important China is to our business value chain. Then there is a case of kind of PLI. So if anything, a limited success story, but one that kind of gives all of us pause, because as a manufacturing company today, you have to have an India story. You cannot not have a very significant, and not just a manufacturing story, but fairly labor-intensive tenets, which are coming as well as a result of what's happened in the elections that just passed. And then economic sovereignty as an implication now for the world. It's not just India that's putting up its barriers, it's everybody. And in that kind of an environment where the World Trade Organization has effectively failed, we are trying to draw FTAs out with multiple countries. So what is the future of free trade agreements in a world that's putting up boundaries has significant implications. And of course, all of that means that now it's not just about buying something from wherever it's cheapest, but about buying it from friends, buying it from people whose values and principles are aligned to ours, country-wise, and sometimes company-specific as well. And that means that the supply chains are changing. And so for us as communicators, raises 2 questions. One, do we know what has changed in our supply chain post the pandemic, because something has changed. And if we don't know that, then we need to find that out. Okay? What has changed, and how does that kind of change the way that our risk profile has changed? In some instances it's gotten better, in some instances it's gotten worse, but the fact is something's changed. 100% of the cases. China plus one, but even Russia. I mean, the dependencies on Russia, it's not just oil, fertilizer, essential commodities. The implications are fairly significant. So finding out what that is very important, and doing something about understanding what the implications on communications are is point number 2. The second point is uncertainty paralysis. I mean, effectively the kind of the dangers of indecision that exist in this year, 2024, because so many governments around the world are lame duck governments. I mean, it's not just the American president, but also, I mean, obviously, Mr. Sunak has led a lame duck prime ministership for 2 years, some might contend. Macron having to go back to the hustings to figure out whether he has a future. About 66 countries in the world have elections coming up. India's just gone through one. We didn't think it was a lame duck election, but it was a significant election with implications. But from a China and US perspective, as being the two poles of the world, if you will, there are issues of concern, because the United States and the elections and the outcomes then will have implications not just for foreign policy, which is quite significant. You know, if you look at the way that Ukraine may play out, for instance, if Mr. Trump comes back, or the way that North Korea and China and Taiwan are likely to play out if Mr. Trump comes back, are significant again for supply chain implications. Ukraine remains one of the largest wheat exporters in the world, even today, even with just about 45% of their arable land being available. And that means that there are issues of concern that will exist across your supply chain, which we need to know about with respect to kind of the US-China implications. China, at the same time, first of all, it's important to know it's not doing as badly as we think it is. Okay? We get bad news on China. The real estate business there is dead. It is hugely indebted. It is never going to recover. Okay? But, and this is a significant but, every other sector seems to have kind of made up for it. So real estate has implications on financial services. The indebtedness of the total Chinese economy is about $300 billion, which is quite significant. But overall, the Chinese economy has shown resilience much, much more than the US economy, which is not very well understood, I feel, in India. And therefore, it's no longer, a write-off. The population dividend that they have, the plateauing off, China will get will not get rich before it becomes old, that's the truism, is also not a given, okay? Because the wealth creation that has happened in the last generation in China has meant that they have enough momentum, even if they do get old, to be able to carry through and become at least self-sufficient and significant enough. The big issue right now with China is the way that politics has superseded economics, in a way that Deng Xiaoping or Jiang Zemin or even Hu Jintao never actually reckoned. Xi Jinping is extremely focused on fortifying the party. When he came into power, the mandate very clearly was secure the party, because the party at that point in time, in 2012 when he came into power, was seen as not being strong enough. And he's fortifying the party with Xi Jinping thought, as they call it. And that has implications not just for economics, but also with respect to the way that the world will cleave out, and so on and so forth. And that is still happening. What does that mean for India? For one, India has the opportunity to get ahead while these two great powers are distracted. That's point number one. And that is, it's a truism in many ways, but it also means that we have to be able to showcase our opportunities well. But I think the prevailing wisdom, and I think I was speaking to some of you, the prevailing wisdom with most investors is that India demands patient capital. Even the short term in India is about 6 years, 5 to 6 years. And I think most investors, private equity investors included, are only now reconciling to that. There was a sense in 15 all the way till 22 that India would be like the other markets. And I think that's proven to be not true. I think India needs patient capital. But again, China is going through its own get rich before get old. Will we be able to get better value as our populations become, older, but also richer? And that is the big kind of tussle that exists between India with respect to the United States and China. And they're important because the United States and China remain the biggest detractors or distractions for money coming into India. If you don't put money into India, where would you rather put it? It's still the United States and China. And that's why the US-China implications are important. The last point, and this is something, especially if you have, international stakeholders, becomes important. India's fundamental belief is that if it continues to grow, economic power or economic growth will become India's biggest foreign policy weapon. And why are we saying that? We're saying that because that's what we've seen happen for about 70 years. As long as you were rich, you could get away with whatever you wanted. The Americans have shown us that. The Russians have shown us that. The Chinese have shown us that. But I'm not entirely convinced that that will be true for India. I don't think that growth model, for many, many reasons, will prevail. But fundamentally, we are predicated on that. We believe as a nation, I feel, that as long as we keep growing economically, as long as we have the right economic opportunity to offer to the world, we will be able to get away with what we want on the military lines, what we want on geopolitical alignment. We can build a port in Iran and get away with it. We can buy Russian oil and get away with it, etc., etc. I'm not entirely sure that's true, and that it's not just got real current geopolitical implications. There are actually probably racial overtones to that as well, and that's not kind of putting it lightly, but it's generally true. Climate, I think, is the third big one. The point on climate is fairly trite. I think the number, the frequency, the severity of climate incidents is growing. I think we all see that in our businesses. If you kind of look at what implications that has on operational resilience for businesses, it's immense. Business continuity issues, supply chain issues, and so on and so forth. But also with respect to the uninsurability. We come from an insurance, from insurance roots. The insurance industry's aghast. There are parts of the world, including in the United States, which are uninsurable. You try and buy a home insurance in Florida today. The premiums are through the roof, unbelievably expensive. What used to be the rate for 10 years, you buy insurance, home insurance for 10 years, you effectively now have to pay, that's about 3 months of insurance premium. So the uninsurability of the world around us is quite significant. And that has implications on our facilities. That has implications on where we manufacture, what that means for industrial townships that we put up, and so on and so forth. And that's a problem. If the world cannot actually value or insure something breaks down in the global financial system because there is no safety net, and that has significant implications. And that's happening in all of our businesses. So if you have a sense of what your company insures and what it puts money behind securing, worst case scenario wise, you will have a better sense. And if you do know it, that's great. But if you don't, make the effort to find out. Ask your company secretary or your CFO, what are we buying insurance for? Okay. Okay, and that's a good way to kind of understand, not just from a climate perspective, but also professional indemnity, harassment lawsuits, third-party risks, and so on and so forth. What are we buying insurance for? Is a really good question for you to ask. We spoke about companies kind of aligning on values and principles-based supply chain relationships. The same is true for climate-based realities. Today, it is easier for companies to justify getting things from across the Arabian Sea as compared to the Bay of Bengal, because the Bay of Bengal has more cyclones and so on and so forth. There are climatically more issues around doing business with Southeast Asia as compared to the Middle East. And then there is a natural gravitation that India has towards the Middle East. And all of these things kind of come together and create a critical mass that could compel India to move in a particular way or direction as compared to another, more intuitive partnership that could exist in Southeast Asia as compared to one that may be a little bit deemed to be a little bit more forced in the Middle East. But again, climate has other more nuanced implications that would be good to kind of understand. From a India perspective, I think the last point probably is the one that captures the imagination of investors. The world today is about $95 trillion economy. Economically, we are about $90 to $95 trillion. It is expected to grow by 2047 to 2050 to about 135 trillion. Okay, so organic growth over the next 25 years. India is expected to provide 70 to 75% of that growth. So we'll grow from 3.5 trillion to 30 trillion, which means about 26 to 27 trillion. These are, broadly understood estimates. So if India is providing 75% of the world's growth for the next 25 years, expected to, I don't know if we'll flatter to deceive, what are the implications on climate, and how does India grow to be able to help the world grow in a sustainable manner? So India effectively could become the first country in the history of mankind to actually chart a course which will be sustainable, inclusive, and more climate and carbon neutral. If we get this right, that's the size of the prize, right? So it's fairly well understood in the corridors of power. It's fairly well understood, and I think certainly a lot of championing that we are seeing around renewables and so on and so forth come from that. But there is a transition path, and we know that all too well. There have been conversations we've had today, yesterday, around understanding that India has to have a staggered path to stopping using carbon and polluting fuels and so on and so forth, but also being able to get technology. I don't think we're getting as much technology as we need to or ought to get to be able to make that transition. But the implications are fairly well understood, and the world understands it. But nothing that we heard in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, or this year last year in Dubai, and the year prior to that in Sharm el-Sheikh, at all convinces at least a neutral bystander like me that the world understands what India needs to be given to make that carbon neutral transition. What are your organizations doing about that? How is your organization looking to do its part in being part of that growth that the world expects to see over the next 25 years? It's a good conversation to have. Trust deficit comes from cyber. I mean, this is, again, one of the existential questions of climate and cyber, if you kind of divvy it up. But effectively, there are kind of three things that I'd like to say. One is, obviously, Sri laid out the world of AI and the opportunity therein. I think the way that we look at it, and I kind of, full disclosure, look at the world, glass half empty. Cyber is a space, digital risks are a space where we have to engage as communicators. And the reason why we have to engage with that is, and when I say engage, we have to understand what it is for our business. We may get away with not understanding the climactic or insurance-led implications to our business, but we will not be able to understand our business as well as we can if we don't understand the digital risks that our companies have. Because that is going to be the biggest regulatory and business compromising incident that will or could happen to any of us.
Is that a risk? Do you think that is going to sustain? Because that for us, startups like us, that's something which we need to take care of. That's an outcome. Multiple things, which you have spoken about. But if we were to talk specifically on that account, okay, what are your thoughts?
Okay. The way that we've seen funding dry up in 22-23, almost 50% of what happened between 20 and 22, I'm talking fiscal years, was quite severe. But there are two very significant positive strains, and silver linings, if you will, dark clouds. One is that when you talk to an investor today, first of all, you have a dearth of choice. Initially, between 20 and 22, there were about 4 people wanting to put money into, not you, but wanting to put money into organizations. And there was always this hustle. There was valuations, sometimes overvaluations that happened all too easily. And there was a lack of diligence, both at the investor's end and at the company's end. Easy money leads to easy mistakes. Okay? What has happened as a result of the funding winter, we believe, or we're seeing it happen now, first of all, the number of targets have come down. Today, a well-established fund with money to invest does not want to invest in 8 or 18 companies in a year. They want to do 3, but they want to do them well. So the number of targets have gone down. But the companies that are getting evaluated are also getting evaluated for longer. And so the money that you get is not just about, here is some money that you keep doing what you're doing, but actually comes with riders and caveats to say, what we are going to do is not just give you the money, but we'll sit on your board and we'll help you with governance and we'll help you build policy, we'll help you build out your business model so that you can scale. And so there is a lot more overt engagement that's coming in as well. I go back to that patient capital point, sir. The point is that if investors now believe that India will take 6 years and can't be done in 3, that can't be a bad thing. It can't be a bad thing because it allows us to build better and build stronger. That's my point on this. Sorry, you were saying.
Previous slide, please. It's a fairly sound model for mapping risk, but this polarization figure, that's one of the risks that has get covered somewhere here. If you see what's happening in the United States, the red versus the blues, and the lines are just getting, even in markets like India. And secondly, demographics, because the average Africa would have 4 billion people. And African population would equal in the next 40, 50 years.
That's right.
Years.
That's right.
The rest of the world. What a long that period. It's too early to think of that.
No, it's not. I mean, I'll take the second question first and then come. Africa. So 6 of the next 6 countries out of 10 that will grow significantly in population over the next 25 years are going to be from Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, etc. India is one of them as well. But we'll grow marginally, 1.4 to 1.5 billion. But Africa is going to be be the big chunk, and there are implications there, both for market economics but also social issues and so on and so forth. And yes, I think it falls into kind of the dynamic thinking that companies have around what they need to do. I think a lot of Indian companies, Godrej is a case in point, have exploited the Africa market really well, and I think that continues to be the case, and there is a huge opportunity. There are therefore reasons why Mr. Modi, for instance, had that overture to the African Union at the G20, etc. So Africa as an important kind of cog in the global economic wheel will kind of only grow in prominence, and I think that's a good thing.
Half the world population will be landed in 2019.
Yeah, so I mean, finally there will be therefore that, if you will, a full turn of the wheel where, civilization goes back to its cradle and so on and so forth. So Africa and its implications for the future of the world, if you look at it kind of from a century point of view, a perspective, or generational rather, not even century, but generational, next generation will be important. And I believe that there is a lot of thinking that is going in on that, and there is a lot of both foresight. I think some of the thinking around kind of sustainable growth that comes into conversations about India's growth also, factor in the way that Nigeria will use its oil resources and Ethiopia will manage its social cleaves and so on and so forth. As far as polarization around the world, in India, etc., are concerned, there are kind of two kind of schools of thought. One is that we will grow fast enough economically for polarized, marginalized, under represented or under or subjugated minorities in all parts of the world to be able to find a way to come into the mainstream. If you look at the China model, it's called the China model. What happened in the Tiananmen Square, with the youth and so on and so forth. I mean, effectively, the youth were shown a road to prosperity. When you start earning $500,000, you forget, notions of revolution and rebellion. And that is one school of thought, that economics will trump social, factors. But equally, there is a very real fear, and India is rated less on this fear, but Africa, since you brought it up, is actually higher, where social implications and social factors will actually be a more significant part of that because of the K-shaped growth that the world goes through, inequality and the Gini coefficient growing, and so on and so forth. And I think the implications on that, at the moment at least, are not being imposed on India, but on many other potential growth markets. Pakistan is another market that's expected to grow in population over the next 25-30 years. It's one of the top 10 high growth markets, but the implications of what a higher population might mean for an economy that may be on the verge of a collapse are quite severe. Maybe we should have more of a thought about America and India and so on and so forth.
Last interruption. Artificial intelligence as an accelerator of economic polarization.
AI as an accelerator of economic polarization. I don't know, Sri, if you want to come in here, but I mean, effectively, I think actually AI could be the great leveler as well. Access to technology, access to broadband, access to technology and upskilling capabilities, etc., are only growing. If you kind of take an optimistic worldview, we've never been in a better place. Even though we are polluting more than we ever have, and we are faced with greater crisis than ever before, the world has never been in a better place. We've never been healthier, we've never lived longer, etc., etc. And we've never had greater access to be able to kind of do more with what we have in our kind of fingertips. The popular thing being, there's more technology in our hands than there was on Apollo 11 when it landed on the moon, all of that. So I don't think AI will necessarily, I don't know where you come on this, but I don't necessarily think that AI will only go in one direction, which is towards economic inequality. I think the story is yet to play out. My sense is that there will be as many opportunities as come our way to not equalize the playing field, but at least to kind of bring a lot more of the world together along with us. The story of mobile is amazing. When I started work, the tele density of India was 3%. We never thought we'd get to 10%. And now, look at us and where we are. So I remain optimistic despite being a risk consultant. Okay. I'll move on, otherwise I'll get scalded by Mr. Prabhu. These are all comments I pulled out. There are about, I can fill about 3 slides more of this, but these are all comments that were made yesterday by folks like Shri and Mr. Bell and others. We also discussed a lot of this in the session, in the workshop that Shri ran, where implications on geopolitics, for instance. The reason I brought this up here is because of how easy it is when we sit back a little bit and think about what it is that could be our wish list. Remember, this was wish list. How easy it is for us to find topics that have such significant business implications and such strong links to risks as we understand them. And the reason why that is important is because it is easier, for whatever reason, to have a risk conversation with your CEO as compared to a reputation conversation. And it's a theory I'm positing. But if you kind of go in with, there are issues of concern here that we might want to look at, by way of monitoring and what that has thrown up, or by way of, things that you're seeing playing out in your marketplace, competition, etc., you have a better opportunity to get in here with the CEO. Okay, that was the reason I brought this up. I'll pull this out. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes now just talking about what a CRO looks at. Okay. Maybe something that you already know, but these are conversations that we typically have with chief risk officers in organizations, sometimes listed, sometimes multinational, etc. And they look at these things to say, okay, where are we falling short when it comes to risk planning? Okay. It's just to give you a sneak preview of challenges that another critical function in your organization could be facing. Okay. They think about a failure of imagination. A failure of imagination being about relying on old assumptions. This is, we spoke about how we are condemned as being media relations people. The same sense of stereotyping exists in the risk business as well. We are still thinking about what happens if there is a fire, what happens if there is a flood, what happens if there is, a fatality, which is really effectively a 20th century kind of perspective on risk, because the implications are much more significant if you see the way that regulations have gone, etc. So they suffer from that. They do feel like organizations get distracted by headlines, and that acting purely on the basis of media headlines and a lack of robust analysis actually is impeding organizations and not the other way around. So if you're taking something into a business meeting to say, this has come out, I think we're better off if we go in with what are the implications. And somebody mentioned this yesterday. What are the implications of what that means? Do we have a robust enough perspective on why that is a critical transition, inflection in the business? Tunnel vision, single scenario. Essentially, you get to what is the most likely scenario, let's work to that, That would be wrong. Chief risk officers are now spending time thinking about what more. What else could go wrong? And effectively, I can't think of better functional experts than a room full of communicators to actually do scenario planning really well. Because we understand stakeholders. And being able to support with that scenario planning phase actually is the easier way to get into the crisis management planning phase rather than being at the crisis management response phase. Plans are static. I don't know. I mean, even today, about 50 to 60% of the companies have not updated their plans post-COVID. They've not brought in the learnings from what they, used. I used this phrase yesterday with somebody. Most companies had a good COVID, and I'm sorry for many of you who may have lost people in the pandemic. But fundamentally, as businesses, we did well. Most companies made a profit. Most companies, had a lesser T&E, costs were down, etc., etc. What were the learnings from there? Have they been codified? Have they been captured? Is it institutionalized? Or have people who've left since 2022 to better jobs and, fairer shores and whatever else, taken that intelligence with them? CROs worry about that. Lack of training and awareness, again, something quite inherent and intuitive to us, as also siloed risk management. They are paranoid. Most risk managers are paranoid that they are not seeing enough of the business around them. They're reacting to what either the investors are saying. CROs spend a lot of time with investors, by the way. Investor days, we don't get visibility into them, but I think Lloyd and others were saying the CFO and the CS and the CEO are supported by CROs and investor relations teams, and so they worry about this, about not having enough.
Risk properly report to finance sector.
No, now CROs report directly to in fact, there are many instances when CROs report into the board. Risk and audit committees are where they report, and especially in internal audit matters, they report directly to the risk and audit committee. This is a tool, and I'm hoping that you won't be able to understand which this client is. This is a live. The reason I put it up was I put it up last night. I didn't have enough time to kind of rewrite it to kind of make it anonymous. But the reason I'm putting this up is because this is the message house for a CRO, and this is called a risk matrix. It's a 5x5 grid that every CRO uses, just like all communicators use message house. You can't see. You will get this. I'll try and kind of remove the writing on it when I finally get to it. But effectively, this is as native to a CRO as a message house is for a communicator. And the reason why I'm putting this up is because if you can look at threats, vulnerabilities, and risks from a likelihood and impact point of view, and understand what's on the right-hand top corner, because those are the high likelihood, high impact risk elements, you know what the company and the CRO are worrying about. So rather than worrying about everything, what is typically called a compliance or a checklist approach, let's just worry about everything. There is very little that a factory in Kandivali has to worry about with respect to an earthquake. Obviously, floods are more important as a risk element to them, and so on and so forth. And this is true and very intuitive and so on and so forth. But this is a CRO's message house. Can we use it in our own understanding of the business? And yes, please.
I have a question. The question is, we typically have a risk register.
Yes.
And a business continuity plan.
Yes.
Large companies. Are you saying that there is something over and above that is required?
No, so both of those, the risk register is actually the end product of this.
Right.
So in fact, I'm coming to. No, let me stay with this. What I'm coming to is exactly that. The risk register is actually your best friend, and it is the end product of all of these things. But
and where does the business continuity plan sit? Because I have owned both.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to understand.
It typically sits for the CRO.
No, where in the process does it sit in? Is there something over and above that, or is it enough to have those?
No, the BCP is actually the final outcome. The only thing, so there is a CMT, which is different. The crisis management plan is different. And the crisis management team is different, and the business continuity team is different. The fundamentals being a BCP is more preemptive and proactive in its implications, because to create a BCP, you need to have a business impact analysis where you look at all of the key projects and processes and what could go wrong and which one do you want back up first and so on and so forth. Whereas with the crisis management, you are essentially scenario-based management of a crisis, and that's why it's different. But yeah, those are two of the kind of end products, if you will. I've put crisis management policy and plan into that mix as well. They're all managed by the CRO, but this is an origin document to kind of lead to that. This effectively comes out as a threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment, TVRA it's called in the kind of lingo. But effectively, the TVRA is feeding into the creation of the business continuity plan. Yeah, I mean that was the only reason I put it up. But effectively, what can
Sorry.
I mean, it's just how does one have a conversation that allows us to kind of get access to a risk radar or a risk register or a risk matrix? These are some questions that we typically pose. I thought communicators could take away when you are speaking to different operational functions. When you are going into a meeting where they are likely to say, "Ki bhai, inhe kya pata?" These are the questions that you could posit. And my kind of wrap question is, where does this sit in the risk radar? Regardless of where it is that you get called in, and our desire here is to come farther ahead, before left of boom, as we say, before everything goes to shambles, we want to come in earlier. Every single time we get that opportunity, we have to, we want to be able to ask the question, where does this sit on the risk radar? Risk register, sorry. And depending on what team you're speaking to, these are some questions. These are just questions, and there could be others, more kind of customized and bespoke. But effectively, this is the kind of prep that one could be doing to be able to make yourself a little bit more compelling as a contributor to that discussion when you go in. Okay. How does the risk management framework work? What typically happens to us is that we come in here, response formulation. But taking two steps back, by understanding what are the outputs that are available, risk register, BCP, CMP, etc., and to talk about scenario definitions, because scenario definitions are happening. In your organization, when a CRO writes the risk register, and for every single function, there is a risk assessment document that kind of flows into the risk register. Scenario definitions are happening. Being able to understand what are those risks that are on the right-hand top corner of the matrix, and then what are the scenarios that are then getting listed out to say, okay, who are the stakeholders? What do they need to hear? How are you communicating with them? These are all things that do get discussed. And oftentimes, we don't come in till something's really gone wrong and you have to write and draft that piece, of communication. Once again, it's kind of the proverbial is hit the fan. But it is possible for us to kind of come in a couple of steps earlier if we do have the understanding of what that process is. How does the sausage get made? And it's different in most companies. But being able to understand how the risk register works and what the risk matrix is and so on and so forth will give us a better ability to kind of come further to the left of this process. Again, these are standard slides. It's not a control risks, proprietary thing. It's how risk is approached in most organizations broadly. Okay. So this gives you a sense of at least how the process works and what you can do to come back into it. And then, of course, there's all of our favorite bit, which is training. Nothing is kind of robust enough till it's kind of, till you train for it and you train again for it and so on and so forth. And again, in most risk management trainings that we do, we call them risk workshops or risk storms or whatever else. The point where the communications person comes in is just on that day. When we are creating scenarios, for instance, maybe a two-wheeler company wants to do an electric, EV fire scenario, etc. I actually actively ask, who else should be in this room to discuss what scenario we are making? No, we need to keep it close. We want to make it as realistic for the executives that come in that room, etc. And so, yes, the good part is that, legal also doesn't come in, compliance doesn't come in, but risk is taking a unilateral decision to say, no, we'll talk about EV fires as a two-wheeler company and not the risk of R&D losing significant IP as a result of disgruntled employees, as a case in point. And if you were to get, say, a communications person in, and I'm not speaking as a result of my own bias for communications, but I genuinely believe that, when it comes to creative problem solving or creative conceptualizing of problems, we do have a role to play in that. And so being able to kind of convince your stakeholders, especially on the risk side, to be able to come in earlier allows for not just more robust risk mapping, but also better training, because you're training for issues that are actually live. And there have been instances when communications people have come in and changed the way that risk workshops are being run on the basis of, by making it more relevant to what was happening in that company at that point in time. The risk guys are very much focused on shareholder value and stock prices and so on and so forth. And that's very important. But perhaps if you're able to keep your IP safe, that will give you a much better medium-term advantage than the first instance. It's just a case in point. And typical, there's nothing kind of, again, rocket sciencey about what this does, but effectively this is how risk managers will think about the training workshop. So very similar to what we do as well. And then finally, I just want to kind of wrap up. Am I on time? Yep, okay. I want to wrap up and I'll then show you a workshop that, you can take away. Again, these slides will be shared. I don't feel like we have the time to kind of do it here, but I think there's one more, yeah. Scenarios are our best friends. Okay. How we get to those scenarios is through the use of risk matrix. How we get to the risk matrix is by better understanding our business. And I genuinely believe that I think we have a really good handle, most of us as CCOs, on what the business implications are, and being able to kind of contribute to a risk matrix, in a constructive manner is possible, and that gives us a leg up. Enterprise-wide engagement, easier said than done, but I think you might find that there are friends within the CRO community, potentially even the CSO community, Chief Security Officer community, that could do with a shoulder to their wheel. They are potentially as badly understaffed or overworked as all of us are, and there could be options there. Now, there were, when I was positing this yesterday, there were suggestions that, we'll take it on, but, as a result of marketing or legal doing something, the wheels might fall off and then we might be left holding the baby. But that can't be the reason for us not to try, is my humble submission. I think we should at least try and understand this from a CRO point of view, outside in, step away from your roles and understand what their implications and compulsions are, to be able to kind of get enterprise-wide consensus on this. Just last 2 points and I'll come to you. Number 3, triggers require effective monitoring. And I think there's nobody who monitors better within an organization than communicators. you need to get the monitoring right. I'm not saying all monitoring is the same, and I think Mr. Prabhu's session later in the day today might be worth our while. But monitoring is important, but when you do monitoring well, consumer sentiment analysis, competitor analysis, etc., there's nobody who does it better than communicators, because you're genuinely doing outside-in tracking. I think we've had that, hold the mirror up, I think was what, I think Lloyd said that, or I don't know if I'm misquoting you, but it's true. So if you do it well, then you have that, and that's actually a very good friend of yours. And the response is only as good as the team, the process, and the training, right? Yes, ma'am. That's it.
So thank you so much for taking us through this. It's not a question, but it's just an observation, and please build on that. In my last life, I had worked on 3 mergers, and all 3 of them global ones. And I found that during the process of mergers and acquisitions, these risk framework comes into play in a very strong way, whether you are being acquired or you are acquiring. And I have also found there was a lot of message board that came out for the CEOs and the leadership team out of these risk frameworks. So it's a good thing for us to consider during those points.
Yeah. Nothing happens in a company, including onboarding partners now, significant partners, without that risk matrix taking place. Of that consensus, to get robust thinking going, I think somebody spoke about the importance of diverse voices. I think a risk matrix exercise actually helps in many, many ways. Anything with material implications to a company, a risk matrix is done. And, yeah.
Good talent.
Yeah. No, people issues, one of the biggest elements of, discussion and debate around risk matrix. Why, where, because, and I say this as a business leader as much as you, there is this fine line between kind of hitting benchmark on salary expectations, being over and above, and then also offering a fulfilling, wholesome work environment. And what is the delta? How much of a pay cut below the industry standard would a capable, ambitious employee be willing to take to stay in your company and engender your culture and cultivate the next generation of leadership, etc. People issues, especially on the risk matrix, get discussed significantly, and because of the complexity, the more complex the issue, the more important it is for the risk matrix to come in. Yeah. Yes, please.
Philip's from Clarion.
We have questions later. I just wanted to leave them with this. This is effectively something that we just created to run a business continuity workshop for an industry association about 2 years ago, and I've kind of borrowed shamelessly. This was when the Pegasus issue was quite live. But I find that cyber issues are great to kind of workshop with, because it's alien to most of us. Okay, so we need to kind of make the effort to work it. And second, it has implications that kind of transcend just the here and now and goes deeper. I leave. So there are kind of 4 slides. I don't know if you've read this, but you can read that at leisure. Here's some considerations. This is a bit of a kind of guide to what it is that you ought to be thinking about. I mean, the first question being, of course, is this a crisis? But it clearly was, so I didn't go there. But essentially, what are the key considerations you should be asking? Our businesses should be asking, and therefore you as communications folks prompting. And then, what are the other things we need to be thinking about at that point in time? Now, when you read through this, you'll realize that these are all aspects of scenario building. One incident has happened, but there is a whole bunch of considerations to put in place. And I think, again, Sri spoke about the importance of annotation, try now, try later. But annotation, or the ability to kind of write down, journal your thoughts and so on and so forth, actually are very important, significant skills when it comes to kind of mapping the risk implications and risk scenarios of any situation. And then, this is just a bunch of other reference slides about the 5 risks I spoke about. So what we could do is, if you want, go through this. This is actually an entire scenario. It builds out across 5 injects and so on and so forth. We can have a chat about this. How would you think about this particular scenario? What are considerations, concerns, questions, related issues of material consequence, and so on and so forth, that any of us in any of our organizations might have to kind of consider or start thinking about. I'll leave it at that.
In the brand, Zoopy. Despite heavy celebrity marketing, Zoopy saw low returns. The SnapU's testimonial strategy, featuring everyday people, resonated more with the audience than Bollywood stars, turning the tide for the multiplayer giant. Make My Trip, struggling to promote MMT homestays against Airbnb, vSnapU covered 5,000 plus homestays, significantly boosting the service to 50,000 plus properties, making MMT homestays a competitive option. Adani Corporation. For Adani, we handle PR for their image of being environment friendly. Through ground coverage in remote villages and content distribution via rural influencers, vSnapU has redefined photography, videography, and PR campaigns for top brands. Through innovative strategies and authentic storytelling, we build trust, resonate with audiences, and drive remarkable results. Trust vSnapU to shape your brand's future.
Okay, so I have a question and a request. But before that, I want to say that crises in our lives, in communicators' lives, don't happen at Monday 7 a.m.
No,
I think
Friday 6 p.m.
You should change it to Saturday 7 a.m. That's what
That's correct. Good point. Good point.
Wow, close to reality. My question is, the last census that was done in India, it's not been done, the 2021 census. So we really don't have in black and white a double click on what's growing and what's growing and where are they. So keeping that as a background, what we do know is that now 1% of India's stockbridge control 40% of India's wealth. That we know. And 80 crore and more on Russians, right? With this rising inequality that we have, which, in as per the Oxfam and many reports, is even worse than the post-independence India, right? So on one side, there is the story where you spoke about economic prosperity and all of that, and India realizes, but on the other hand, this is true, right? The 80 crore Russians and the 1% controlling the 40% of the wealth. Where does that sit in your top 5 risks, and how does that impact the take on India? That's my question.
Okay.
My request is that when we do the question answer, when you wrap up your session, if you could just maybe make the connect, because perhaps in some people's minds it could be more nebulous, a little bit tenuous, say, what's happening in Vietnam and what's happening in Taiwan and what's happening, between Mexico. Really, how does that impact, our decision making, and where do we need to keep all of that in mind? So that's just a request.
Okay. Well. So the India economic story, and many of us know this, is about the India's GDP, $3.4 trillion, but 65 to 70% of that is domestic consumption, right? And the implications of inequality as they exist are significant because the fundamental premise for economic growth in India comes from that particular domestic consumption continuing to grow. There are, not quite the census, but there is enough indicators to suggest that the broader trajectory to both poverty alleviation, especially, in the pandemic, obviously it took a dip, but then post the pandemic, the way it's grown, as well as the ability to purchase has broadly gone up. But the debt levels, especially household debt, personal debt, non-investment debt, has also grown up. And so a lot of India's recent growth and indeed even kind of consumption has come in a very large part down to debt, and that creates some fundamental infrastructural or macro problems for the economy as a whole. So in addition to what you're saying, which is the kind of inequality inherent, there is also the quality of what that consumption is and how sustainable that is, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why most investors into India have kind of come to the conclusion that India will have to be a longer term growth story, the patient capital, the short term in India is 5 years, is because of that. There will be one of two things that will happen. Either there is a banking style restructuring which leads to the NPAs restructuring that happened, the FCI, the Food Corporation of India restructuring that happened, that has to happen. So there is large scale management of debt in India, and that starts with public sector undertakings, distribution companies, but also kind of household wealth and so on and so forth. That there will have to be some sort of a reckoning for that debt to kind of start becoming less of a concern. I don't know if China has not been able to do it. They're the one country in the world that is best positioned to do that kind of restructuring of debt. So I don't know what options India has to work on those fronts. I mean, I'm sure all of us would love to get a debt holiday from the government on a bunch of our EMIs, etc. The possibilities of that happening are minute. Okay. So that gets us to the second option, which is about whether we can invest our way out of this particular hole that we might be digging ourselves into. And that's very much the stock and trade, at least economic strategy, that seems to be coming to the fore. India's growth in the last 5 years has been almost entirely driven by public investment. The government has spent on infrastructure and so on and so forth. Private investment has been lagging. I think most of us would kind of agree. I don't know if many of us have have a diverse or a distinct point of view on this, but I think private investment has largely lagged. And I think somebody mentioned the triple bottom line story. And so I think the real story would have to be kind of private investment, but investment coming in the way of labor-intensive manufacturing, investment coming in the way of kind of empowerment. So, I mean, this 80 crore that you're talking about is a floorboard. Can we use that floorboard as a springboard to kind of empower people to do more with their lives, etc.? It's about kind of how welfare in India changes guys from being, what popular politician said, roti बांटने की सियासत से roti बनाने की सियासत. That distance has to be traveled. Whether we can do it or not is actually the big bet. Yeah, but inequality will remain one of India's kind of big threats. Yes.
In the job interviews, one of the things, risks that I look for now in the last 1 year is young people's debt risk.
Yeah.
Most of them are so burdened with debt to look for their family, or their 6 cards and they keep spending money until their access to credit become very useful to the new economic players. And many of them are just struggling, don't know, and the kind of mental stress they're going through. It's a much more prevalent phenomenon than is understood.
No, it's true. It's very. Yes, please.
I have a question around you mapped it country-wise in terms of the risk that I've seen. What about the regionals? So today is one of the headlines, especially I come from the state of Karnataka, for example. There's so much push around language. There's so much push about regionalization. There was an investment story as well. That homegrown companies are investing in other states. So it's forget the competitiveness between states, but it is taking it as if within the country you are now you're so polarized that you consider that say the investment went to Maharashtra. You consider Maharashtra more like an enemy than being part of the thing. So I feel that's one part of the question that I have is that good for the country or even for an economy if you look at a larger landscape of it? The current existing government must have done a lot of things which are good, and especially around the northeast and everything going ahead and everything, but it's still, you are hitting pockets of development. It's still not reaching across, or it's not strategically well done. Because one example that I'm referring to is Ether invested something in Maharashtra. Okay, to which there was a thing between politicians and everything. But if you look at it, 2 months back, there was a conversation and I was talking to a journalist and everything around Tesla coming to India. It's been talked about and everything. Might not happen, that's a different thing. But Tamil Nadu is actually the state which is so well positioned for that, because almost all the electric battery manufacturing OEMs and everything exist in that state. If he comes, all likelihood it will go to Gujarat. That is also known fact.
Okay. Okay. I'll try and answer that. I also wanted to make a closing comment to try and make it relevant. One of the things I'm kind of constantly paranoid about is, the so what element to all of this. How does it impact our lives, our daily, priorities and considerations. So I'll answer that question and then I'll come back and just have a closing comment on that. Look, center-state federalism as a concept, as constitutionally engendered, is actually a good thing. Okay, so the central list, the state list, and the concurrent list are all well-founded tenets of a robust democracy. Okay, and interstate competition is actually conceived as something that should happen. The Indian tax structure, which became inefficient, but which existed before GST, actually was meant to give states the competitive advantage to charge taxes as per what they deemed could create and give them competitive advantages. So, aviation turbine fuel, for instance, was, significantly higher tax in Kerala as compared to, say, Delhi, and therefore, most airlines fueled up in Delhi and then flew to Kochi and, had to have enough fuel to go back to Delhi because they didn't have the wherewithal, that sort of stuff. So it's not a bad thing. The only precedent we have globally is the American system, where also competitive federalism, and I think if you can come in here as well, has worked well. Most states have their own, in fact, they have Supreme Courts. Most states have their own Supreme Courts. It's like our high courts, and they make their own laws, and they are meant to kind of provide competitive advantages. I mean, there is a reason why most Indian companies that incorporate in the United States go to Delaware, because that's where, the taxes are lowest. I think maybe even 0% or something like that. Ridiculous. So it's not a bad thing. Okay. The weaponization of it for political gains could create a problem. But the issue of concern is less to do with that and more to do with what kind of investments are going in. I mean, my big concern is not that it's going to Gujarat or to Maharashtra or to Tamil Nadu. It's about Suzuki, and I'm sorry I'm kind of stating this, but it's a fact. I think most people would know this. Invests $2 billion into Gujarat to set up an EV assembly line and an EV value chain. Employs 800 people for a $2 billion plant in India, 350 of whom are security staff. Right? So when we talk about labor-intensive manufacturing to give jobs to people, it's not a direct proportionality that if you put $2 billion in, you will give employment to 20,000 people, as is proven here. And this is time and time again, we are seeing this greater automation, greater degree of shop floor, mechanization is actually impacting India in that way, not the other way around. Now, in Gujarat, you will get workers coming in from Bihar willing to work for 100 rupees rather than 150, and they will get the jobs because that's the freedom of movement that India allows, and there is benefits that go back to the Bihar economy and so on and so forth. Now, as communicators, and I'm going to bring it straight down, I'm being, just trying to kind of keep it bridged. The question is not about where Tesla will finally set root, or the semiconductor plant as and when it comes up will set root, or whatever else. It's about what implications that might have on our ability to either, suppose you're an FMCG company, or if you're a fintech company, or if you are a value chain partner to that particular industry, what implications there are, what opportunities there are for you to look at that as a business opportunity, and what risks exist that will stop you from fully being able to leverage that investment. Now, if you are, say, I know you're not, but if you are an automotive, say an EV, supply chain partner, tier 1 or a tier 2 supply chain partner that could potentially tie up with Tesla, what are the implications for you if Tesla were to go to Gujarat? Would that mean a whole new greenfield setup? Does that mean new partners for you? Are you going to be able to ship from Karnataka into Gujarat? All of those implications come into play with respect to your social contract with people there, your ability to kind of manage risks, your ability to kind of handle issues of concern that might come up as a result of something that happens in Gujarat, if your center of business is Bangalore, and so on and so forth. So those are all the things that could become important, rather than worrying about my feel. I'm just, rather than worrying, because we can't do anything about it, rather than worrying about whether politics will intervene to influence, where the investment goes.
More of a understanding question, not a communications question.
Yeah.
Investments.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I answered that part then.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yes, please.
Hi. I'm just going to connect it back to, we've been talking about geopolitical risks and, all of that. And I'm sure all organizations are, mapping business risks, like, something as basic as, what Kodak went through, or, what Airbnb did to the hotel industry, right? How are you seeing it pan out, right? And I'll just give you an example for us, and because we are a GCC here in India, a challenge is to make our US counterparts understand the communication need for the risks that we have in the operations, right? Because as a retailer, they are focused on so many different things out there in the US, right? What's happening with the interest rates and all of that. So the challenge is that as a GCC in India, we have to deliver cutting-edge technology solutions.
Yeah.
As a retailer, we have to be relevant from an omni-channel standpoint, right? But we know the problem that is there over here from a technology talent standpoint, right? So the kind of branding, communication, investments that need to happen. So my question is, how are you seeing these kind of business risks pan out, especially from a talent standpoint? Because just before we get the first thought, I said talent is an important risk that we're talking about. One is retaining talent. Second is when you're seeing a pivot for yourself in the industry. For example, my employer branding challenge is to attract talent, but to attract talent from an Amazon or a Microsoft, where that talent is not, I'm not even in their consideration set, right? Because they perceive a GCC to be doing low value work, right? How is that risk of talent retention and attraction being looked at? Because at the end of the day, to navigate all of this, it is going to need the right kind of talent in the organization.
Okay. Look, I mean, I can speak experientially about a couple of companies that we've helped. One is to look at this from a graduate recruitment point of view, where organizations either have it goes beyond just a placement approach, but either a very kind of solid engagement with a particular institution which seems to deliver a particular kind of talent, or sets in place a graduate recruitment program where you get in people from that particular industry and kind of catch them young and watch them grow kind of thing. That's almost as a rule in few of the GCCs that we worked in, including in Bangalore. That seems to be the prevailing wisdom, that it is possibly impossible to sustain, especially from a data analytics talent pool, cyber digital risk talent pool. Salaries are only going one way, and the dissatisfaction and the disenchantment is high, etc., etc. You have to be able to kind of build from the ground up, and then again take a medium-term view that these things will kind of, say 50% of the 40% of the talent will stay and will deliver for the longer term. Will have a sense of pride in the brand. Will have, will look at you from a culture, from a connect point of view in the same way as they might, an Amazon or a Google. And so when Google inevitably comes knocking, they're like, maybe I'm fine here because I have the opportunity to grow. That's kind of one of the ways. It's kind of, there's no kind of short-term answer, I don't think, but that's how kind of risk officers in these GCCs are looking at that. The other is constant retraining. I mean, I think one of the biggest, best examples of, especially technology companies, again with GCCs in Bangalore, look at talent is by constantly moving them around into kind of new areas of business, where they are doing multiple projects and so on and so forth. And inevitably there tends to be 8, 18, 30 different teams that are working on different things and so on and so forth. And just moving them around where you have, the ability to say, I've spent 8 years in this company, but I've done a new job every 18 months kind of thing. That is the other thing that companies seem to be doing. But I was saying this to Deepa as well. I mean, employee talent management, and I think you said it as well, so as a risk is probably, or deserves a lot more attention, and is probably something that involves the most amount of thought, considered thought, empathetic thought, as compared to any other risk area that I can, that I've come across. Operationally speaking, more than digital risk, and potentially even much more than climatic and other areas. Yes, please.
Two quick things. One, can you explain the map a little more? You said India has different colors I cannot see from here. But it all looks yellow to me.
Yeah.
And then Iceland is the world's most risk-free. Is that
Basically.
That's Iceland. Iceland, and then so we can highlight some things for us, and then I will question after that.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's not country specific. It genuinely is not. There are multiple. I mean, Jammu and Kashmir has a different shade, slightly different to. And so, if you kind of look at this on the website, and maybe with high resolution, you will see that we do kind of go deeper into countries to kind of identify risk areas. There was a time till about 2 years ago when India did have a kind of deeper shade in the middle where the red corridor was, for instance. But that risk is deemed kind of lower, or was deemed lower, maybe it needs to come back up, etc. But effectively there are kind of three things, and some of that, and this kind of 10-point grade chain effectively looks at three different things. One is political risk, stability, at a central government level, not a state government, but a central government level. So India rated in 2024, at least in December 23, fairly high. Maybe that color will change now. Political instability is a real aspect of our kind of our political reality, if you will. And the second is physical security. So the ability to kind of move easily, across different parts of the country for people of all abilities, genders, etc., and the third being cyber. So, what is the degree of risk that exists? So those are the three parameters that go into the risk map. And most times, although in this kind of, I can't seem to kind of find a country with a little bit more nuance. In most cases,
Africa, how many are just the same as Europe or the US?
yeah. Well, I mean, Africa has a little bit more of a higher rating than Europe. I mean, I think they would be kind of between 4 and 5. But the fact is that Sub-Saharan Africa is actually going through a fairly big patch of growth. I mean, if you look at kind of most countries, you will see, I mean, except for along, say, the Eastern Seaboard, they are going through a fairly significant growth spurt. And they are showing promise, I think, going back to the point that Ismail made as well. So there is value and virtue in kind of looking at those markets. Sujit's not here when I look for him, but I think Godrej could kind of speak to the value of the Sub-Saharan African marketplace. I mean, in Malawi, Godrej is deemed as a Malawian brand because of how important their hair extensions are to people of that country.
My question, one of the things that's been eye-opening for me is to be among all these corporate people here for the last 2 days and how much interest and validation there is of ESG. And as you may know, in the US, it's the opposite. Setting like this, there's so much negativity about ESG in general. Thanks in part to Elon Musk, who claims to be an environmentalist. Every day, it's just push down. Is there a chance that, thanks to the poisoning of social media, that will happen in India as well? And in the next 2-3 years, we could see a flip into that? Because if that happens, then all your hopes for India leading in a neutral way will go to hell.
Yeah. Well, two things. One, I think India has taken a little bit more of an active regulatory stand. I mean, the BSRS regulations that SEBI put out, which is only for the top 1,000 companies at the moment, maybe less. But effectively, there is a more regulatory stance on it. Now, the SEC did have a
2% tax. CSR, compulsory CSR.
That is correct. Yeah, the CSR tax
in the world.
Yeah. So I mean, on profit, and this is 2% of profit. So it is a significant number.
And the stock of it was 3 years profit
2%. Yeah. So there is a regulatory compulsion that is being put on Indian companies that obviously makes it as certain as death and taxes. So that's one, which means that companies are compelled to kind of do something about it and therefore be material. And if I have to pay it, I might as well make it count, kind of thing. So most of us who are kind of looking to spend CSR funds are kind of therefore contributing to real, true social causes. Many companies are still parking it with the PM CARES fund, but even PM CARES fund, has ways in which to kind of make it work. But I think more to the point, the impact investment aspect of ESG and the value that most sovereign and impact funds are putting on, making a difference to, say, farmers, apple farmers in Himachal Pradesh, or water harvesting in Rajasthan. All of that stuff is actually very real, and it's making a fairly significant difference to the lives of people. I think the developmental aspect, I was having the money that's coming in from philanthropy and developmental kind of funds is actually making a very real difference, and is now been co-opted in some ways. I mean, I wouldn't kind of make too much of a deal about it, but has been co-opted by the current administration. I mean, BMGF, and again, I don't know if there's anybody with from the Gates Fund. I don't think so, but BMGF and the way that it kind of works in consort with the government to kind of drive the Swachh Bharat mission, their mandate is open defecation-free India, and it's the same for the government. So there have been a lot of instances of kind of people finding convergence, international and India. So my sense is that ESG will be met with less skepticism in India, because there is a lot more to be achieved before, implications of greenwashing and implications of, kind of optics and management come into the picture. I mean, it's more intuitive than anything else, but there seems to be enough kind of material evidence to suggest it as well.
And also CSR, I think government is giving more impact reporting.
Correct. exactly. You have to kind of show what change you've made. Yes.
Just one little point.
Yeah, sure.
Once again, there are mics in the hand of Sunita and Sripashi and then Law.
Okay, sorry.
No, but I have a different question altogether. So if it's about the topic, you
Just
go ahead.
one point. One of the thoughts on ESG in India, why it might stay more relevant in as context of the US. One is that everyone believes in India, the environmental impact is here for all to see. Right? In the big cities, we're seeing the pollution, we're seeing what death by heat strokes and such like. So I think companies can't push environment more as a corporate decoration. Now it's your employees who refuse to come to work, whether it's 50 degrees or getting pollution. So I think that's one aspect. The second part is that unlike the US, where thanks to Sarbanes Oxley and all the rest of it, government standards vary little between the best and the worst companies. India has a wide variance. You know, let's say a data group company gets a huge premium because governance, and there are unlimited companies that suffer because of that. So I think because these two ends, the environmental aspect in India and here, and the citizens feel India and governance, ESG, while expense will stay far more relevant and won't get pushed to the back. That's one of the thinkings.
Sorry, I also have a relevant question on this map. Amit, I'm just thinking that is this map relevant from only if you look at it from US and UK point of view, headquartered in Russia, South Korea, Japan, Middle East, and when their CCOs have to look at this map, does these colors invert or the risk analysis?
Is there a Western bias?
The reference points kind of change because the money, let's take a VC fund, from Japan or South Korea. Their risks are very different from the way US and UK looks at this fund. So my question is, do we look at it contextually or this is all for this?
This is universally true. This is not kind of geo-fenced for an India version or whatever else. So we have one version and we hope it is the truth and so we stand by it. But you're 100% right. I think is there a Western bias, Mr. Bahl asks. Is there a context to, depending on where you're sat, Japan, South Korea, etc. The point I would make to that is, first of all, the appetite for risk that exists in Japan is very different to the appetite for risk that exists in the United States or what have you. Now, when you are looking from Japan to the rest of the world, you have a certain amount of money that will go into US Treasury bonds. You'll have a certain amount of money that will go into Western Europe that will be parked for 8 to 9% inflation, included returns. And then you have the rest of the world where the more kind of higher risk, higher return capital then gets imposed. So if you are a Japanese overseas development agency like JICA or JETRO, what have you, you do have that staggering to say, okay, this much of my fund is kind of fundamentally safe under, kind of US Treasury bills or what have you, and then this much and then this much. That doesn't change. I mean, if you look at the way PIF invests, the Saudi sovereign fund, or if you look at the way that the Kuwaiti investment or the Qatari investors invest, they invest in Africa, they invest in Europe, they invest into sporting, clubs, they invest into renewable energy. So, it's portfolio management at the end of the day. And I don't genuinely think that just because a part of the world is a different color, you necessarily need to either ignore it or, kind of over-index on it. That would be my point of view.
Merit of investment.
At the end of the day, it's about kind of, would you rather invest in a gaming company in India or a palm oil company in Malaysia? And that's an existential business question, and you kind of weigh and measure it. The colors kind of come into play, but at the end of the day, it's about risk return. That would be my kind of limited point on this. Sorry, we need to. Yes, ma'am. Sorry,
I have a question.
Go on, please.
I'm Sunita and I come from Tractors and Farm Equipment. I've been reading about this Siachen Glacier, Saxon Valley and all of that for some time.
Yes.
A couple of months ago. And then there was this article that spoke about how Pakistan, various regions of Pakistan, like from Balochistan, Sindh and Gilgit-Baltistan, all those POK pieces
there's a lot of discussion about some part being acceded to India. Would happen. There is a probability that this would happen. So I don't know whether
From Pakistan or from China?
No, it been acceded to India. They'll accede to India.
Will POK become a part of?
Yeah. Is that a situation that has come up in your political?
Yeah, we'll look at it very closely, and I'll make a broad sweeping comment. Sorry, I'll just leave it here. If you hyper focus on the map of Kashmir, the Aksai Chin part actually has what they call the Pan-Himalayan highway that connects Ladakh to the Xinjiang province, Urumqi and Kashgar. That is probably one of the most strategic highways for China. And the reason why they want Aksai Chin and the reason why salami slicing happens is because for them, it's a paranoid concern that India will, in the dark of the night, go and place a couple of Bofors guns on top of a mountain overlooking the Pan-Himalayan highway. And remember, these guns have massive range, up to 100 kilometers. So you don't have to be overlooking it. You can be a distance away. They're paranoid about that. And so the reason why they keep taking more of what may be deemed as irrelevant territory is because they want to build a deeper buffer. There is, fundamentally geostrategic reasons for building that depth. Given that, will they ever exceed? I don't think so. Is my personal opinion, is the opinion of our China analysts as well.
Yeah, maybe not the Aksai Chin part, talking about more about the
Pakistan, POK? Why would that happen? Why would that happen?
No, because there's a breakdown, I understand, from whatever
No, so the same thing works in the other way as well. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the CPEC, which kind of connects through Urumqi, Kashgar down into Gwadar, the port city in Balochistan, actually goes through Gilgit-Baltistan and goes through, and they spent, I don't know, about $6 billion in just that one particular strategic investment. Even if Pakistan can't manage economically, China has the economic interest to keep the CPEC alive. And remember, CPEC, and if Gwadar comes to or becomes the port that it is envisioned, they wanted to make a Shanghai out of Gwadar. It will fundamentally change China's maritime capabilities by having a port in the Arabian Sea. About two of three ships that come out of the Straits of Hormuz now turn left. About 20 years ago, it used to turn right to go to Europe. If China was to be able to get oil into Gwadar from the Middle East easier, then it fundamentally changes their economic reality. So there are no economic or geostrategic reasons to believe that POK will ever come back to India. And I'm sorry, I'm making a sweeping statement, but it is.
Because there's a lot of views that have been going through, and
Saksham Valley has been handed off to China, and it has been handed off to China because Pakistan wanted to get. It was part of kind of the payoff for CPEC actually, and they wanted to kind of.
But I also read that we're going to be claiming. There's going to be a claim to Saksham Valley.
We can make. I'm sure we can make all the claims in the world that we can.
Okay.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Hi, Amit.
Propaganda machinery is also okay.
Okay. Hi, Amit. Shilpashri here.
Yes.
I wear a couple of extra hats as compared to Copcom. One of them being CSR ESG, and the other one being public affairs. Both of my previous companies and the current one. So I just want to add perspective on examples from real life that we've gone through. So you will get an idea of what happens just on the ESG piece for Shri. India governance getting even more stricter. Some of us in this room are in the listed top 150 safety and our BRSR now has to be assured by a third party. We've all done that and we've got the assurance. And I'll tell you a couple of examples of what BRSR assurance checks as a third party auditor. We talk about using renewables, we talk about using water from tankers or using your own water. And this is all data that you've given out in the last 5 years, 10 years, like at least last 3 years, right? They go to the extent of checking if you have those bills. You have to have copies of those bills, physical ones scanned, kept in your systems included. Those are the kind of detailing that India is doing to ensure that there's no greenwashing happening. So ESG is here to stay, it's not going to go. Now coming to the example that Sanaj gave about the whole Tesla story and how companies pick up states and what happens. I work with Renault-Nissan Alliance, okay? They have a setup, the Renault-Nissan Alliance, market-wise in India, both the cars put together, not great. Like, I think at that point it was 7-8%. But they used to export, like to every other country, Middle East, East, West, everywhere. And at some point, the Nissan, I think, as a brand, used to export more than even Hyundai. So they have a plant in Tamil Nadu, which is like Oragadam, if people know, and they also have an engineering center. Both teams put together is about 13,000. I'm talking about 2015, okay? 15,000 people, employment.
Is the engineering center in Trivandrum?
No, in Madras. So it's like border Madras. Okay. I mean, like, where Sri Perumbudur, where Rajiv Gandhi got killed, right? So that's where it is. Where you have Daimler, we have, Royal Enfield and the rest of Apollo Tires and the rest of them. So when I was there, the public affairs main mandate was the plant was set up when Karunanidhi, that is DMK as a government, was there. So they had promised a certain set of SOPs. You do this, so much business, you will get so much tax. So in 2015, the company had pending tax bills from the state to receive amounting to close to 800 million USD.
These are incentives that the government had to give.
Yeah. Which was somewhere around 5,000 crores.
Yeah.
Now you tell me, and that amount was Jayalalitha. So the reason why, I think everybody talks about you need to have stable government for growth, etc., is because one government promised, you went, set up plant. Now the other one is not giving you incentives. Imagine the leadership's problems of facing their own companies, both at Renault and Nissan. I mean, the only question everybody used to say is, you proposed at some point that you want to set up a plant in this state. It's 5,000 crores, you're not able to get back the money. What are you doing? You're knocking on every possible door, not able to get out money. We went to the central government. I remember, I shouldn't quote names, but then it was a CM session, and Nitin Gadkari used to be the automotive. I remember our chairman and me visiting. We said, Gadkari ji, can you just help? You know what his line was? He said, what do you want? You want to be profitable? I'll give you 2 states. You need a port. Pick up, he said, Gujarat or Maharashtra. 2 years, you'll be out of everything. We'll get you everything back. Don't ask me to talk to Jayalalitha. Right? Because that party is not under my control, neither is she as a leader under my control. Now imagine, without batting an eyelid, he said, but you might think, oh my God, how ruthless, right? 15,000 people employment, imagine the kind of supplier base. But for an organization, you actually start thinking, saying, maybe I should have chosen another state where I know for sure at least the government is not going to ditch me on things like this, and every leadership is getting sacked because they're not able to get this money back. And over that, you have pressure saying, can you again invest? Can you again invest? That's the kind of life that corporates actually lead, especially multinationals lead in this country. The daily things on this, somebody sets up, somebody signs up, somebody does. We go and sign on whether it's a Gujarat investment or something like that. And a lot of us, so he said, Tesla should come, go to Tamil Nadu. I'm telling you, if ever I meet, he will meet Elon Musk, best friend.
Correct. Before anybody else.
Tell him, even if he doesn't come to India, it's fine. But if he comes, he should never go to Tamil Nadu. Worst government. I'm telling you. So I was just giving a perspective. We only think of stuff that we read. We tend to kind of, there's so much happening on the background that none of us realize is happening.
So I'll just make one point on that, if you don't mind. One is very, very well made. Yes, please, sure. Yes.
Which are the biggest risks? Yeah. So some of the factors which are the biggest risks from the Indian perspective: climate change, geopolitics, technology, with all these, let's say, 5-6 points that you put there, can you tell me, let's say, a couple of sectors, apart from insurance, of course, which you talked about, or companies which are under more risk than the others? So 3 to 5, let's say, sectors or companies.
That's a good question. I would kind of, I don't want to be glib about this, but I think every single sector is likely to get impacted with at least one, if not all, of the 5 sectors. But I think the ones that are likely to get most impacted are one that actually make things, so manufacturing companies more than services companies, and in organizations or in sectors where there is a greater dependency on regulations, especially government engagement. I think I'd put it more politically correctly, where there is higher degree of government engagement and regulations. I think we'll see a greater degree of impact. I think you will see a lot more issues with organizations or sectors where the dependency on supply chains are extensive. Again, manufacturing comes into play, but also, maybe hotels like this, which have cargo, catering needs, etc. So, in a kind of, you asked for 5 sectors, I would kind of put that down as kind of core sectors. Number one, so the cement industry, I don't know if Ram is here or the cement industry is going to go through a significant change. I mean, cement is one of the biggest producers of carbon in the world, much more than any other sector. So is there a concept of green cement? Will that change? By implication, every infrastructure industry, whether it's building ports or airports, etc. So the carbon footprint is high. So the core sector, so power and all of that. So that's one. Second would be kind of any manufacturing sector, regardless of whether it's just assembly or whether it's kind of ground up manufacturing, will have implications because of not just the carbon footprint you create, but also the the ecosystem you build around your factory physically, but also virtually, and then of course the supply chain element inherent would be number 2. And I think the one sector that I think Sri spoke about it, the impact of digitization. You folks see it. As they say again, megabits need megawatts, and so if you don't have the power and cooling in the data centers, then that's going to be fairly significant. And if you are reliant on cloud and Google Cloud and Amazon and Azure and so on and so forth, does India have the power infrastructure to be able to kind of keep up with that? I mean, we are digitizing at a maniacal pace, so there are going to be implications there as well. So I'd kind of put it down to core manufacturing and then technology-enabled sectors for that reason.
What about, let's say, one of those 5-6 sectors that you mentioned? What about geoeconomics? Considering there are countries are going for bilateral partnerships.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a threat for a country like India? India is of course signing its own FTAs, but where there's friendshoring coming into play, those geoeconomic partnerships, would that be a threat to India?
I mean, if you ask me, again, geoeconomic soft landing is the only reason why geopolitical hard landing is working. We can't seem to talk to each other, but we're still doing business. India-China, biggest example. We've not had a direct flight to China. I think Aditi's article, right, 2 days. We've not had a direct flight to China in 4 years. And in that time, India's exposure to China, and you folks know this, right? In critical industry, it's API. It's not about Rakis and toys anymore, right? That we've comfortably outsourced to Sri Perumbudur and
Visas to China is down 95%.
exactly, but $100 billion in trade deficit with China. $100 billion, most significant. So geoeconomics actually is a salve, is one of the reasons why we won't blow out of proportion, despite the world kind of not being able to make sense of who's friendly and who's not. So as long as you're making money, there is an incentive to kind of keep, at least writing emails back and forth, even if you don't make phone calls, right? Thanks.
One question, not a clarification. Is it like everyone is trying to do China plus one, but are we also having I always look at the ASEAN countries which are there, seem to be having, they are the ones who are slightly going ahead of us. Say, for example, I read a couple of articles which were saying that it's not the threat from China, but it is from Vietnam that we should be looking at. Or all these countries in those regions which are, trumping India because we have a lot of complexity. You have more patience. You need more patience to invest in India. Takes time. So much of heartburn and everything. So are these actual threat compared to say others? Their size was just small.
So, I think the story that we miss about China plus one is who's the biggest driver of China plus one? Who do you think is the biggest driver of China plus one? It's China. It's actually China. China cannot anymore manufacture at $4 an hour because their rates have gone up to $16. And so Chinese companies are going to Vietnam, are going to Indonesia, are going to... Now, in 1617, when Mamallapuram happened and Ahmedabad happened and Xi Jinping was holding hands with Mr. Modi and he went to Xi'an and so on and so forth, the biggest conversation in China was about how can we make India our manufacturing base.